Joining us live from Washington, D.C. to talk about the crisis rocking Venezuela is global affairs analyst Stephen Hayes. It's nice to have you join us.
Thank you. It's good to be with you again.
Yes, Maduro's regime has been described by Foreign Secretary David Lammy as fraudulent, while Canada, in its imposed fresh sanctions, at Foreign Minister Melanie Joly calling Maduro's actions shameless. Now, Maduro and his government have repeatedly denounced many of these allegations leveled against him by Western countries and opposition leaders. What are your thoughts on this? Let's pick it up from there.
Well, I think it's sort of a set of complex thoughts. When I read this this morning, I think, one, that the sanctions are probably deserved. I think that they are late in coming, frankly, although I understand why they waited until the inauguration. But how effective they're going to be, I don't know. I've always questioned the effectiveness of sanctions. These are particularly aimed at individuals, which I think is better than general sanctions overall, because in general sanctions to a country, what often happens is that the poor and the workers suffer more than the targets do. And that will probably be the case in any case with Venezuela. But I think that there are a lot of implications. A second area that I was thinking about, too, is that whether Trump would have done the same thing. And I don't know. He's more transactional. He might have tried to strike a deal. But this also does force the next administration to either support those sanctions or withdraw them, which would be politically damaging as well. So it's all very interesting to me right now.
All right, let's quickly talk about the sanctions that were made. What are your expectations as these sanctions and calls for arrest continue? Also, what is the future of democracy and the rule of law in Venezuela, most especially in the light of what has been described as Maduro's illegitimate attempt to seize power?
I think that the sanctions, the first part of your question, the sanctions are going to have minimal effect, frankly. Basically, we were already in many of those same positions that the sanctions now make official. What I think is more interesting to me is that the other countries, at least Canada certainly, and Canada would have been very careful about what they were going to do, support this, as does UK and other countries. So it's going to create a stronger international momentum within certain circles. It's also going to drive Venezuela even closer to Russia, and perhaps China as well. So it's again, nothing is really simple. It's fairly complex on that. It's going to be a long-term process, as all sanctions are, but this does put a lot more pressure on Maduro, which I expect him to resist as long as possible. As far as the arrest warrants and so forth, they're not going to have an effect. He'll go to where he's safe. He's not going to travel where he's going to likely be arrested or could be arrested. So it's largely, I think, pro forma in a way, perfunctory, but it is an important statement. As far as the future of democracy, I think that's a worldwide question right now. It's not simply limited to Venezuela. There is a populist revolution going worldwide. There is doubts on the effectiveness of democracy. I think that effectiveness is stronger in some countries. I think it would be very important, though, in Venezuela's case, to have a far more democratic society. So I think that's going to put pressure to conform to that direction, but I don't think it's going to happen easily.
All right, global affairs analyst Stephen Hayes. We'll come back to you shortly. The conversation will continue shortly, but then first we need to go back to the story about the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, who has been sworn into office for his third 6-year term. Mr. Maduro has promised that his latest tenure would be a period of peace, but the U.S., which finds his leadership crooked, has announced a $25 million reward for information leading to his arrest. We have a report.
Apart from the U.S. pledging a $25 million reward for information leading to the arrest of President Maduro, It is also promising a reward for the arrest and conviction of Venezuela's Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello. The U.S. is offering a new reward of up to $15 million for the arrest of Venezuela's Defense Minister, Vladimir Padrino. In the same vein, the UK has also issued sanctions on 15 top Venezuelan officials, including judges, members of the security forces and military officials. The UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office says those sanctioned were responsible for undermining democracy, the rule of law and human rights violations. The UK's Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, describes President Maduro's regime as fraudulent. Meanwhile, the EU says it will be extending restrictive measures against Venezuela because of the country's lack of progress on restoring democracy and the rule of law. It has sanctioned 15 Venezuelan officials. Canada has also imposed fresh sanctions in what its foreign minister, Melanie Joly, calls Maduro's shameless actions. The country says it will not tolerate the erosion of Venezuela's democratic process or the repression of citizens seeking to express their rights. The results of Venezuela's election on the 28th of July 2024 were widely rejected by the international community, including Brazil, Colombia, and some of Venezuela's left-wing neighbors. The inauguration ceremony was overshadowed by condemnations by the international community and Venezuelan opposition leaders. But the Venezuelan president and his government have denied the allegations made by Western countries and opposition leaders. Mr. Maduro blames the collapse of his country's economy on U.S.-led sanctions, but his critics blame it on corruption and economic mismanagement. Meanwhile, in Ecuador, Madrid, Paraguay, Spain and Colombia, hundreds of Venezuelans joined a global opposition-led demonstration against Nicolas Maduro's leadership. The Venezuelan communities in these nations say their agitations against his leadership will not stop until he is out of power.
TVC News, and we still have standing by from Washington, D.C., Global Affairs analyst Stephen Hayes, who has been sharing his thoughts with us on the crisis rocking Venezuela. What else do you think will give Venezuelans the kind of standard of living they desire?
Well, I think a lot's going to depend on President Trump, frankly, and what he does. If he follows through on these sanctions and doesn't withdraw them, and I don't think he will, then I think that will put far more greater pressure on Venezuela for change. Because of his transactional mode of being, because of his talking to others, that includes the allies of Venezuela, I think that will put far more pressure. The reason I think that he will not change his reverse the Biden decision to put sanctions on Venezuela is that Venezuela is also the source, one of several sources of the major issues that Trump wants to address. One is immigration. Because of Maduro, a lot of Venezuelans are leaving the country and heading to the U.S. That's both at the borders as well as through airports. That's going to be an issue that Trump promised to address. And also, Venezuela has been a source, as are several countries, of drug input into the United States. So I think the next administration's stance on Venezuela is going to be very important to change in Venezuela.
And on the sanctions going on, do you see more nations sanctioning Venezuela?
Well, I think it's encouraging that more nations are, including Latin America. The Latin American countries don't necessarily follow U.S. Wishes often. And the fact is that they are putting pressure now on Venezuela. The law does say that there's a great legitimacy to the issues. So I think the more nations that do put on sanctions, the more likely there's going to be change. But I think change is going to be very, very difficult unless something very dramatic happens.
I'm just thinking, what do you have to say about some leaders who love to sit tight in office, regardless of the many oppositions?
Well, that seems to be a universal pattern. It's once someone has power, no matter what the source of that power is, be an oligarchy or democracy or tyranny, they're reluctant to leave office. So it's a human characteristic, as far as I can say. Power does tend to corrupt. It does tend to make people want either more or want to stay in place. So I think there needs to be, I don't know if it has to be, but there needs to be greater transitions of leadership for the sake of the countries and for the sake of the people. And I think that's a difficult process, especially during the time of populism.
All right, most thank you, Global Affairs Analyst Stephen Hayes, for sharing your thoughts with us on the crisis rocking Venezuela.
My honor. Thank you. Good to see you.